Hey Calvary kids, I hope that you're having a great new year already. It's been a couple of days and I hope that so far it's been a good year for you. Today we're going to go back to where we were in the overall big story of the Bible. Because you remember, we had kind of been walking through the Old Testament, walking through Jesus' life kind of in order, but we took a break from that in order to learn about the Christmas story. So the last story we learned before we took a break for Christmas, if you remember, was the Transfiguration, or when Jesus showed Peter, James, and John his full glory on a mountaintop. Well, this week we're going to learn about some parables Jesus taught the disciples. Parables are things that teach people something about God using everyday objects. So pause and as a family, turn to Matthew 13:31. Jesus taught parables to help them understand things about the kingdom of God. And something kind of challenging to explain, like the kingdom of God, could be better understood through using everyday objects people were familiar with. And that's what Jesus does with these parables. He uses things that people would have seen in their everyday lives to help communicate a truth about God that otherwise might be a little tricky to understand. And of course, parables still could be a little tricky to understand because of the different images used. But ultimately, Jesus is trying to teach the people things about himself, about God, and the kingdom of God. So pause it as a family, read verses 31 through 33, and talk about what you think this parable is teaching about the kingdom of God. Remember, these parables all have to do with the kingdom of God. In these first two parables, Jesus talks about a mustard seed. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with a mustard seed, but mustard seeds are really, really small. I mean, seeds are already small, but mustard seeds are particularly small. And Jesus talks about how a mustard seed, after you plant it, eventually grows to be this very large kind of bush that's bigger than a lot of other plants. And then he also talks about leaven. Now what leaven is it's something that you mix into bread dough, and that's kind of what makes bread fluffy after you bake it. So if you don't put leaven in the bread, it stays kind of flat and becomes almost more like a cracker. But leaven is what gives bread kind of its softness, its fluff. And something about leaven is you only need a really small amount of leaven, even if you have a big amount of dough. So the two things Jesus is talking about, a small mustard seed and a small amount of leaven, both affect big things. A mustard seed becomes a big plant, and a little bit of leaven can affect the whole big batch of dough. So similarly, God's kingdom is going to start off small. It's going to start off with just a few people, right? Just Jesus' disciples. But eventually it's going to grow and grow and grow to become bigger and bigger and bigger. In both of these parables, a man is described to find something of great worth. In one of them, he finds a treasure hidden in a field, and so he sells everything he has so he can go buy that field, so he also can have the treasure that is buried in it. And he also talks about a man who discovers a priceless pearl, and then goes and sells everything he has so he can have that one pearl. And you see, people watching the man in this parable may have thought he was making bad choices, right? Like, why are you selling everything you have to buy this one thing? Well, you see, it's because the man knew the amazing value of that one thing. And Jesus says that's what the kingdom of God is like. You see, not everyone is going to know and understand the true value of following Jesus and the kingdom of God. And B, people that do recognize the value of Jesus and see how great he is will be willing to do anything so that they can be a part of it. So what do these parables have to do with us? Well, we just finished celebrating the Christmas season and learning about how Christmas is the beginning of God's rescue plan to save all of humanity, every person, from their sins. And we also talked about a little last week how we are living in this time of waiting between Jesus coming the first time and how Jesus will eventually return the second time. And while we live here on earth, we have an important job to do, which is telling other people about Jesus. You see, that's how the kingdom of God is going to grow. That's how this small mustard seed is going to turn into this large bush. That's how this small amount of leaven is going to work its way through the whole dough. It's how an amazing message that began with just a few disciples is going to spread over the whole world to every tribe, nation, and tongue. And you see, we don't have to go overseas to tell other people the good news about Jesus. We can do that right now, right where we are. So the last thing I want you to do before you're done with your lesson for today is to talk about as a family who you can share the gospel with this week. Just the good news about Jesus and his kingdom. Well, until next time, Calvary kids, see ya.